Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Ware. I'm one of the board members of the Brewers Association, and thanks for coming down to this session. Just want to do a quick introduction, and then I'll get out of the way. Today we're going to have Sales and Marketing Identity Brand Power for Success. Aaron Gore is going to be our speaker. He's Director of Partnerships and Community with Arrived, and we're happy to have him today, and I'm looking forward to having a nice session. Thanks.
Thank you. Everybody hold your applause to the end. I promise I know more about sales and marketing than I do about technology. But hey everybody, welcome to Identity Brand Power for Success, where we are going to be talking about what a brand is, what it does, why it's important, and how to build brand guidelines for your own business. I know a handful of people in this room. There's plenty more who I don't, so I'm sure some of you guys are asking yourselves, who the hell is this guy and why should I care? Thankfully, I have a slide for that. My name is Aaron Gore. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Community for Arrived. Prior to that, I was a consultant for the industry for years. I worked with more than 65 breweries on 3 continents, originally starting out on the sales and marketing side before realizing that my third client didn't have a functional P&L after 7 years, and all of a sudden I became a general brewery operations consultant. So fortunate enough to work with a lot of breweries, but one of the things that kept coming up time and time again as I was working with my clients was the importance of branding, just how much of an impact that made on their business, and also just how misunderstood and underappreciated it is. So we're going to talk a little about that here today. But before we dive in on that, one of the things that we need to do is establish what exactly a brand is. So I'm going to go ahead and call on somebody in the class like we're all in 3rd grade again, so unless somebody raises their hand, guess what? You're going to be it. Nobody. All right. You looked like you didn't want to be called on, so what is a brand exactly anyways? Give me your definition. And introduce yourself to the class.
Yeah, I'm Connor Ducharme. I work at Frog Alley Brewing in Schenectady. I'm reaching all the way back to my college marketing days. A brand is kind of how your customers understand you as a business. It's a snapshot of what you do, what you sell, and who you are. But it can go so much farther than that.
Yeah, that's completely ambiguous, but also right on the right track. So you have the right orientation. So all a brand really is the gut feeling or general perception that a customer has about your company, your service, or your product. Nice and simple, very parsimonious. The biggest thing to take away, though, from that is the orientation. This isn't what you think about your business. It's what the customer thinks about your business. That's what's really key here. And now I can definitely understand, there's always some people in the room, anytime I start talking about branding, who, they still got it in their mind, dude, why are we even talking about this stuff, man? It's the beer industry. If you brew it, they will come. But that kind of field of dreams thinking, it's not true anymore. If it ever was, then it certainly isn't in 2024, We really got to pay more attention to this than we ever have before. So why should you care about your brand? Why is it important? Well, first and foremost, your brand exists whether you care about it or not, whether you think about it or not. It's one of those things that far too often, people in this industry, we really do want to focus just on the beer and just on the people, and I understand why. That's what gets most of us in this in the first place. But all a brand really is the perception that people have of your business. And if you don't do anything to cultivate that, it doesn't make people view your business any differently, and it doesn't mean that they're going to have any less fully formed thoughts about your business. They have those thoughts one way or the other. And it's only by acknowledging that and doing what you can to help guide those perceptions that you're actually able to lead the horse to water, so to speak, and get them towards the perceptions that you think would be most advantageous for your company and for your business. And it's all about perception. It's not just about reality. It's not just about the facts. We like to think, well, our brand is just having the best damn product. Well, yeah, you and everybody else. And it's not just about that. At the end of the day, why did ABI buy up so many breweries over the last 15 years? Or 2011, 13 years, math is hard. They did that not because they couldn't make the beer that Wicked Weed or Goose Island or Blue Point were making. At the end of the day, we don't like to acknowledge it, but the best brewers in the world work for ABI. They can make the same beer that literally anybody in this room is making better than you can. It's not a knock on any of you. It's a simple fact. They have the money, they have the resources, they have the equipment to be able to bring those people in, to be able to do that. So why did they spend, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars buying these companies? Because of the brand. because of the emotional connection that customers have, because of the perception that people have about those companies. And it's not as though they didn't try in the past. Anybody who remembers back into the 90s, the first craft beer boom that we all seem to forget happened in the early to mid 90s, the big guys didn't try to just buy up a bunch of companies. What they tried to do is build craft brands in-house, and it didn't work. It didn't read as authentic, and it didn't make an emotional connection with customers. And that lack of connection was so bad it wound up crashing the industry until around 2004. You need to be able to guide those perceptions, and you need to be able to connect with customers emotionally. Now, a good brand also helps you make some decisions. If you're a brand that is entirely around Heißgebot, German styles, nothing but lagers, then doing a hazy IPA is probably not going to be the best thing for you. It helps guide some of those decisions, because at the end of the day, that is one thing that we're all replete with if we're running a business. We have so many possible decisions that we can make, so many different directions we can go. How do you narrow that down? Knowing who you are, knowing how you perceive, and most importantly, knowing how you want to be perceived makes that a lot easier. Also helps with employee retention. When you have a strongly defined brand, employee turnover reduces by about 30%. That's absolutely huge. I know that doesn't sound like that much, but does anybody know the average cost of replacing an employee versus retaining one? Anybody? It's between $4,500 and $6,500. That adds up extremely quickly, and that's the low end. Some estimates go as high as 3x that person's salary. So being able to retain employees, even just 30% more employees than you would otherwise, absolutely critical. And if all you have to do is have a well-defined brand that's helping the rest of your business to do so, then it's entirely in your best interest to do so. And customers, they make a difference as well. You know, this even has real financial impact on your business. It says it up here, but I'm going to go ahead and read off the slides like a really crappy high school teacher. You know, at the end of the day, people will spend up to twice as much for a brand they feel an emotional connection to. You see this reflected all the time in things like generic drugs. You know, those generic drugs do the exact same thing as the real things, and yet people are willing to spend drastically more for the name brand. Guaranteed value Fruit Loops. They come in a bag. They're still the same damn Fruit Loops. In some cases, these are even made by the same damn company, but people will spend more because there's an element of trust and an element of connection there. Branding matters. Last but not least, this is the one that tends to piss people off the most. At the end of the day, your brand is the single biggest driver in the vast majority of purchases people are making your product. Now, where I usually get the pushback on this is usually from people who come from the brewing side, and I understand why, because what they see when I put that is that, you know, product doesn't matter, and that's not what I'm saying at all. But think of it this way. If I go to a dive bar here in Albany tonight, they are probably going to have 2 or 3 craft beer options. The average grocery store has 100, 150 craft SKUs on the shelves. We have 10,000 breweries in the US. Guys, if the goal of the craft beer industry was to make it easier to get good beer, then we did it. We won. Pat yourselves on the back. Everybody give yourselves a round of applause. But it doesn't feel that way, does it? Because at the end of the day, what really makes sure that people are pulling your brand off the shelf, not just a brand off the shelf, is that brand. That is the thing that makes the difference. Because at the end of the day, brand is what sells the first SKU of the first sample of every single product. If people are buying your products because they've heard how good your beer is, that isn't your product, that's your brand. The product's feeding into it. The product's reinforcing it. The product is helping build that reputation. But if they've never had it before, it can't be your product that made them make that purchase, can it? If you introduce a new SKU, if they've had 20 beers from you and you introduce a new IPA and they pick that one up too, they're doing that because you've built a reputation. You've built a level of trust. You've built a brand, a perception in their mind that keeps them trusting that when they have that product, even if it's something completely novel and completely new, that they know it's going to be just as good as the things that they've had before. It's not that product doesn't matter. It matters more than ever. The difference is that right now, product's not a differentiator. It's the cost of doing business. If you want to have a brewery, you have to have good product. Everything else gets layered on top of that, and the way you differentiate is through branding, it is through those experiential things. It's all the stuff that goes around the product. Important thing to keep in mind, there are more successful breweries with a good brand and mediocre beer than vice versa. Please do not call anybody by name, but we all know some people who are like this. And we've all seen it for years. There's a reason that the Big Mac is the #1 selling burger in America. Is it the best burger in America? Hell no. But it is consistent, and it has got very strong branding. It is very well reinforced through their marketing. Same goes for, well, I normally would say Bud Light, but now Modelo is a better candidate. Why is it so successful? Is it the best lager in America? No. but it's very well branded and has an element of trust and consistency that people really value. That's what's making the difference. So what are some of the other benefits of a strong brand? One of the most important ones is that when you have a high rotation industry like craft beer, you need to keep people coming back for more. And just like I described before, as you have people beginning to try your products and have more and more product that has rewarded their money, rewarded their time, rewarded their patience, that makes them that much more likely to come back and buy more products from you. That is a virtuous cycle of return. That is a way of keeping customers coming back so that they don't feel like that 10, 12, 15, $20 that they're spending on a 4-pack is at risk. That's not a lot of money. It's not little money. And no one wants to be in that position where you take a risk on a 4-pack and then you have 3 of them sitting in the back of your fridge hoping to God for a house party where somebody will just drink the damn thing because you tried it and you thought it was absolutely terrible. Being able to build that brand and build that level of trust with your customers is important for circumventing that. It's also important for fighting off price sensitivity. We talked earlier about generic brands, and that's exactly what's happening there. You know, right now it's no secret that customers are more sensitive about what they're spending their money on than they have been in quite a while. You know, people are feeling that crunch on their pockets, perceived or otherwise, and you know, they want to make sure that they're spending their money right. When you build that trust and when they know what to expect from you, that plays a huge role in overcoming some of that price sensitivity. Now, we're very fortunate in the beer industry. Price sensitivity is a little less important than it is in... Please turn off your phones. It's a little less important than it is in a lot of industries. I don't know if anybody tuned into Arrive's webinar with Bart Watson, where he parsed some of our taproom level data across the country, including in New York. Beer has a price elasticity of 0.56, and I don't expect anybody in this room to know what the hell that means. It means we have a little bit of room to move. It gets that much stronger when you have a good brand that people are able to really relate to and really be able to trust. It also makes it a lot cheaper to be able to launch new products. Again, when people know what to expect from you and they have an idea of what your brand is, it goes a long way towards making it so that you don't have to start from zero. At the end of the day, any sort of purchase, really kind of think of it like a thermometer. People start down here at whatever their level of awareness is of that particular product or brand, and when they get up here, they buy, they spend money on it. Now, if they've never heard of your product and they've never heard of you, then you are starting all the way down here and you've got to raise that thermometer through nice labels, raise it through communication, raise it through marketing materials, through samples, through trial, until you finally reach the point they're willing to spend. When you have a strong, recognizable brand with key components that they can trust and they come to expect, that starts you not from zero. You might be starting pretty high up on that scale, and it makes it that much easier and that much less expensive to get people to buy your products, especially novel products. And most importantly, well, not most importantly, but these days, very importantly, it also drives your company's value. You know, there's going to be a seminar later on succession planning. It's something that right now in the industry, in the state we're in, both as far as the number of people who are beginning to age out and want to retire or move on to other things, as well as just the nature of the industry's difficulties when it comes to cash positioning. Succession planning is very important. That means the value of your company is very important, and it's no secret that your stainless isn't worth nearly as much now as it used to be. Did you know that for the average company, brand value can make up to 40% of the total valuation of a company? Does anybody know what the most valuable company on earth is right now? Apple. It's Apple. Even though I hate this damn thing. It's Apple. 80% of their total valuation is brand. It's not iPhones, it's not equipment, it's not stores, it's not even revenue. It's the brand. Brand has a huge impact on valuation, so as people start looking to move on in the future, and this is important even if you're just looking to bring in additional funding, additional loans, that's your collateral you're talking about, not just what you're able to sell your business for. Now before we dive into how to actually build brand guidelines, one thing I did want to talk about, just because it's become more and more relevant in today's landscape, is a little about brand architecture, and we'll just touch on this briefly. So, brand architecture just means the hierarchy of different layers, different levels of brand that your company has. So right over here is the parent brand. Now, pretty much everybody in this room has that. All that means is this is your company's name. So whatever your brewery's name is, in this case a New Belgium Brewing Company, that is the parent brand. That is the umbrella that is over all the other branding beneath it. Now, beneath that are two different types of brands that fall below that. So a sub-brand just means the particular type of beer. So if you are Walking Stick Brewing and you have the, I don't know, the Tree Hugger IPA, IPA would be the sub-brand. That's just a piece of that branding that falls beneath the larger umbrella that is whatever your company is. Pretty easy, pretty parsimonious, I think we all understand that. It's that second piece that's become that much more important over the last few months to a year. And that's that endorsed brand. So I don't think anybody in this room is unfamiliar with Voodoo Ranger. Can anybody raise their hand and embarrass themselves if you've never heard of it before? Just really hoping to get at least one person. So Voodoo Ranger is made by New Belgium Brewing Company. Do you know who the average person on the street, just the average normie, would say makes Voodoo Ranger if you were to ask them? Voodoo Ranger makes Voodoo Ranger. They have absolutely no idea that New Belgium has anything to do with it. It's right there on the can, but the most important thing is they're not leading with that. That's not the driver. That's not the thing that's making the sale. What's making the sale is Voodoo Ranger. That's an endorsed brand. It is Voodoo Ranger by New Belgium. It is not New Belgium Brewing Company's Voodoo Ranger. It's a big difference there. It's something that you're seeing a lot more of. Rogue is doing this with their Dead Guy series. You're starting to see more and more of these iterations upon those sub-brands, and that's really where those endorsed brands come in. Now the one all the way on the right, and this will be important for some of the rest of what we're going to be talking about, that is an example of how you can stretch your brand too far. Because one of the beautiful things about an endorsed brand is it lets you do things with your brand that otherwise really wouldn't make sense. Because what is New Belgium itself? And let's remove Voodoo Ranger from the equation. Let's maybe rewind the clock a little bit. What was Voodoo Ranger, or, see now I'm doing it. What was New Belgium known for prior to Voodoo Ranger? Yeah, Fat Tire, it's Belgian beers, amber ales, very traditional styles. So if they were to roll out a hazy, double, juicy IPA with a skull on the front, would that have really been in keeping with their brand identity? That was a big fucking risk. So why did they do it under this endorsed brand? Because now they don't have the weight, both positive and negative, behind New Belgium, potentially dragging that brand back, or worse, putting their core business at risk by doing something that doesn't feel really like it harmonizes with what they're known for. A hazy double IPA from New Belgium is both less appealing to hazy IPA fans and undermines the core value proposition of the New Belgium brand, so they introduce an endorsed brand. Now where this can go awry is when you get too far away from what that niche is. So all the way on the right, actually before we do that, if I were to say Voodoo Ranger's entire lineup, what would you guys say they're really about? What are they known for? What are those beers really focused on? What's the defining element of Voodoo Ranger products? Hops. Almost everything that they do is some sort of IPA, other than their Atomic Pumpkin. Everything that they do in the Voodoo Ranger line is big IPAs, hop forward. So all the way on the right, does anybody remember Devilishly Light Lager? This was 2 years ago, guys. That's it. They put a big, massive push with Devilishly Light Lager, which this is an endorsed brand of an endorsed brand. If you really squint, I mean really squint, you can see that that's Voodoo Ranger Devilishly Light Lager. Just a ranked standard American lager, and they rolled it out to the market with the same skull motif and trying to leverage the distribution of Voodoo Ranger, and you know what happened? Absolutely fucking nothing, because nobody associated Voodoo Ranger with a light lager. It's not what they were looking for. That wasn't the value proposition. So the lesson here is be careful with your own brand, because as we talk about brand guidelines and how to build them for your own business, you have to keep those differentiators in mind. What makes your company what it is? That could be product differentiation, that could be locational differentiation, it could be any number of things, but the further away you get from that, sometimes even a good idea can be a bad idea if it doesn't feel true to the personality of your business. So, defining your brand. Now, before we get into any of this, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that when we talk about brand, another word you can use is personality. Because that's really how people relate to companies. They don't relate to them just as a company. They relate to them the same way that they relate to people. Some brands are loud, and some brands are quiet. Some are austere, or reserved, or respectable, and some are wild, and punk rock, and crazy. Some are funny, some are very serious. Brands have a personality, and that's what lends people comfort, not what lends people trust and expectations. You need to be able to figure out what the personality of your business is. But before you can really start guiding people towards where you want them to go, you have to have a good idea of how you are perceived now. This is less relevant if you're a brewery and planning, because how you're perceived now is you're not. But if you're an existing brewery, you need to figure these things out. And that's important. So you need to be realistic, and you need to ask people, and not just your friends and family. How many people got into this business thinking they had the world's best beer because their mom and their girlfriend said so, and they really thought, they were going to win every medal at GABF, and it turns out they just had really, really nice friends? You have to be willing to ask normal people. So go sit at a bar if you're in distribution, talk to people who are ordering the product. Just as important, talk to people who didn't order your product and ask them why not. Be able to interact with folks and figure out what's their general perception of your company, what's the general perception of the products, both good and bad, because you need that honest feedback if you're going to be able to iterate on it and build off of it. But most importantly, after you have that, you have to ask yourself 3 core questions. And I'm going to come back to these because these are really the core questions of everything that comes from this. And thank you, Kathleen and the keynote, for setting this up. Who are you? What do you do? Why is it important? Now these seem pretty straightforward. And who are you is, that's just your company. Who are you? It's Bob's Brewing Company. What do you do? We make beer. That why is it important? That's absolutely critical because that's your differentiator. Why should anybody care? Because at the end of the day, if you can't answer that question about why your customers should care, then I guarantee you they can't either. You need to understand why your company is important and why it deserves to have a place in the market, because you need to earn your place in the market. I once had a client when I was consulting who was going into a town that already had 5 breweries, relatively small town. He wanted to know if there was room for 6, and I said no. But if you don't believe that yours can be one of 5, then you shouldn't be opening in the first place. They sold about 3 months ago. They were only in business for a year and a half. They didn't believe in what they had. They didn't believe in its reason to exist. They didn't have a reason why it was important, and that's why they fell down. You also have to figure out how you're going to be able to communicate these things to your customers. It's the old adage about how an idea that you never do anything with is a hallucination. At the end of the day, you really have to be able to communicate this stuff, because you can have the world's best story, and if you tell it to nobody, it doesn't matter. So, building a set of brand guidelines. And we'll go through these one by one. But core elements are brand story, elevator pitch, your voice, taglines and descriptives, and then diving into your visual language. So brand story. This is really where you're going to sit down and answer those 3 questions. Now I say sit down because you need to really get this on paper. Again, Kathleen did a fantastic job of just teaming up for all of this. Things that you write down are important because those are things that you're much more likely to hold yourself accountable to. It's not writing it down in pen and making sure that it's not something you ever touch again. All of this needs to be living documents. You should be revisiting these, and there might be times where some of your assumptions are proven wrong. But when you write stuff down, it gives you something not only to reference in case you need a refresher, but it also gives you something to hold yourself accountable to because you know it's there and it exists. So sit down and write yourself out a couple of paragraphs talking about your brand and talking about the story of your brand. Do it descriptively. Do it like the kind of thing that you would put on the website, that thing that everybody scrolls past it when they're just going to get to the beer or get to the contacts, Do it like that. Get those questions answered and get them answered in detail. Make it interesting. Make it fun. And then go back, sit down and read that. And ask yourself, are you fucking falling asleep by the end of it? Because if you are bored silly reading the story of your own brand, then that's a problem, because I guarantee you, again, customers are even more bored than you are. You need to make it something that's compelling. Now, that can be your history, that can be your values, your ethos, that can be what you do, what your company is about, the products that they make, but you need to get that down and you need to make it something that's interesting, something that is absolutely compelling to people, because that is your value proposition in long form. So sit down and get that brand story built. And now's where we actually get it down to something usable. So anybody who has ever had to secure funding for their brewery knows that you're going to work out like a 45-page business plan, and the bank is going to skim like 3 pages of it, and you're going to feel like it was an enormous amount of wasted effort, but if you only showed up with 3 pages, they'd laugh you out of the room. Yeah, your elevator pitch is all you're ever going to get. It's all you're ever going to get with people who you're seeking funding from. Investors, all you're going to get with wholesalers. They got much better things to do than listen to you talk for 3 hours about your product. But most importantly, it's all you're ever going to get with the average customer. It's not that people have short attention spans, they do, but more importantly, for most people, most customers, for every single brewery in this room, people don't care that much about beer. It's not that they don't care about beer, it's just one element of their lives. They probably have things they care very deeply about. It might be music, it might be comic books, it might be professional wrestling. I don't care, I don't know what it is, and neither should you. At the end of the day, beer is just one aspect of their lives, and so when you're talking to them at a tasting, or you're talking to them at a beer festival, you have maybe 30 seconds to be able to explain to them why they should care about your company and the products that you're putting out. This elevator pitch is a way to do so. You need to understand how to talk about why what you do is important, who you are and what you do, in as few words as possible. 2-3 sentences. That's all the time that you're going to get, and that can be the difference between someone going and picking up your product off the shelf, or someone going and picking up something from every other person in town off the shelf. One of probably the single most important thing you can do in your brand guidelines. Next up is going to be your voice. So again, we're talking about brand being a personality, the personality in your business, the way that people perceive you and see your company and feel like they could interact and really vibe with it, for lack of a better term. So you need to have a voice. Does anybody follow Wendy's on Twitter? So Wendy's has a very defined voice, and that voice is asshole. All they do on there is just absolutely poke fun at everybody, and they're really quick. Whoever they got doing that stuff is just absolutely brilliant. But they've really built a defined voice, and no, that voice might not necessarily be, we have square hamburgers, but it doesn't need to be, because what it makes you do is care about what they're going to be posting, care about what they're going to be putting out there. They've built a sense of who they are, and they put it out into the world. That's all your voice really means. And if you have people who are coming across as super funny and lighthearted in some of your posts, and people are coming across as super serious and dour in others, or super dry, or what have you, you need to have a consistency of voice. You know, I've really spent years building my brand on being loud, obnoxious, and pretty much annoying, but I've done that very intentionally. And if I all of a sudden became very serious and very contemplative, then most people would be calling the nearest therapist and hoping to God that I can get some help. It's all about building a level of consistency, and that means finding your voice and making sure that it's consistent across all of your communication. That doesn't mean being one note. People aren't one note, but we have our funny friends, we have our serious friends, we have different relationships with those people, and we need to make sure that we're putting forward a relationship and putting forward a personality that people can understand and that people can relate to. Taglines and descriptives, this one's super straightforward. On the right, by the way, and I forgot to mention this earlier, these are all examples from a completely fictional brewery called Chop Chop Brewing, because I had like 15 minutes and wanted to have some fun with it. So just use those as what they are, examples of how you do this in practice. Taglines and descriptives, this is something that everybody, when they think of branding, thinks of. This is your slogan. This is the ways you want to, the words that you use, you know, the different taglines for your products, for your company, but it's also more than that. You also need to get the language right. You know, you could have a brewery that's been around since 1994, and there's a lot of ways of describing that. You could describe it as old, or you could describe it as legacy, or you could describe it as heritage, or you could describe it as pioneer, or you could describe it as innovator. These are all things that are equally valid to describe a brewery that's been around for 30 years. 30 years ago, it was 1994, holy shit. These are all words you could use to describe a brewery that's been around that long, but they have very, very different connotations. They tell very, very different stories. So getting down on paper, the words that, yes, you want to use. This is the associations you want to have, the words you want to own in the customer's mind, but you also want to get the words that you really don't want to use. You don't want to be described as that you can not only avoid, if at all possible, but you can guide the conversation away from. You don't want to be an old, dusty, ancient brewery. You do want to be an innovator who has built a legacy and we're absolute pioneers in the industry. These are very different stories that are all talking about the same company, and you need to be able to guide that conversation yourself. And then the world's tiniest text, visual language. So this is the piece that is by far the most associated when people think about brand, because they rarely get further than their logo. I know some people in the industry who haven't even gotten that far. There was one in North Carolina, which is where I am from, that looked like they quite literally designed their logo in MS Paint, which is not something to be proud of. But your logo is still important. Your visual language is important, and it does extend beyond just your logo. A couple things about logo: keep it simple, keep it easy to communicate. If you can't render it recognizably in 2 colors, unless it is something that has spent decades, like Sierra Nevada, building up recognizability, it's probably too complex. Font is also important. It's underappreciated, but fonts have a voice and they have a vibe and they tell a story very much on their own. It's a very easy thing to overlook, but when you have different fonts, even if customers can't put into words why it's off-putting or feels wrong in some circumstances, they can still feel it. And if you have any like graphic design friends, and I'm sure a couple of you in this room are probably on that side of the business, fun thing to do is send them a message in Comic Sans or Papyrus and just watch their heads explode. Different fonts give a different vibe, and you need to have a set of standard fonts for different settings that you're willing to use. It doesn't have to be over-engineered. It's okay to use Helvetica as long as you're doing it purposefully rather than just because you picked something out of the Canva set. And then you need to have some brand colors. It is absolutely infuriating to have your brand colors be, for example, green, and then have 15 different shades of green used anytime you make a post because somebody couldn't be bothered to just look up the one you used last time and use that. If you're looking at your Instagram feed, you have all those different shades of green, and they're not complementary and consistent and purposeful, it's insane. It's almost worse than if all those colors were absolutely different. I was a goth kid in high school, very quiet, reserved person, which I know is hard to believe, but I promise you it's true. There's nothing worse than seeing like somebody decked head to toe in black, but it's like 4 shades of black. That's exactly what happens when you don't have consistency across your colors. So just keep it consistent, and I'll keep harping on that. Consistency is so important, just like it is with people. If every time you met a person they had an entirely different personality, you know, that'd be very off-putting. If you're like, oh, hey, Bob, and he's like, ah! And the next day you're like, hey, Bob, and he's like, it's off-putting, it's weird, we don't like it. Same goes for companies. So, how to put your brand to work. Just a few tips and tricks, and I'll have a couple slides on this. Again, consistency is absolutely important. Consistency doesn't mean boring, though. You know, you still need to vary it up. You're having a conversation. You know, there's going to be different contexts, different audiences, different things that you're trying to communicate, but you do need to be consistent. Again, if you have multiple people who are touching your communication channels, make sure that they all have an understanding of what the brand is supposed to be. That's why it's important to have a shared document that everybody's able to tap into. That gives everybody a point of reference and the ability to build off of that themselves. It's also important to know when to harvest and when to grow your brand. So Sierra Nevada is a classic example, as they are with so many things, of when to harvest your brand equity. So number one product for Sierra Nevada for most of their history, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, the greatest beer that's ever been made. But hazy little thing, when that rolled out, wound up being a much bigger hit than anybody expected. Now what they did was pulled a lot of their marketing dollars out of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and put them into hazy little things. Something that sounds, if you're new to the marketing world, would be absolutely insane. But the reason that made sense is because they knew Sierra Nevada Pale Ale could survive on its own for a while. They knew when to harvest some of the brand equity that they had spent 40 years at that point building. And that's exactly what they did. Poured those dollars, poured that energy into this thing that was a little more now with what the moment needed. And sure enough, while Pale Ale did drop a little bit, net for the company wound up being extremely positive to the point where Hazy Little Thing is now the number one product in the company's lineup, and Pale Ale is not only stabilized, but it's climbing back up again. They knew when to take the foot off the accelerator pedal, let it coast for a while, because this thing over here absolutely needed their attention. So brand equity isn't just something you're building into a vacuum, it's not the Tower of Babel, you're building it for a purpose, and the purpose is to be able to harvest it later. It's also important to be able to build a dialogue with your customers. You know, one of the things that the best social media native companies really do well is they're not just speaking at you, they're speaking with you. And we all know that there are times and places to absolutely ignore things, untapped, but you still need to be able to have those conversations because that feedback's coming live. Like, we are in such a charmed era where instantly we can find out what people think about our companies and we can get that feedback on what we're rolling out. And yeah, a lot of it might be negative. You gotta take it with a grain of salt and you gotta parse it, average it, look at it from every angle, but people didn't have that benefit in the past. You put a product out there and hope to God the sales data told you something, and you probably weren't even going to get that live until 3 months down the line. We live in a wonderful era where we can actually converse and we can build a personal relationship with customers in a way that was never possible before except for over the bar. Lean into that and leverage that. One thing I've also found has been useful over the years is naming a chief brand officer. This is not a paid position, sorry everybody, God I wish it was. In most cases, this is going to be the owner. In some cases, it'll be the marketing head. Depends on the scale of the company and what kind of roles you have within it. But having a CBO just means having somebody who's really the final say on, is this in line with our brand and what we've established, or is it not? Now, as the owners and the operators of the business, you'll always have the final say on taking a risk, even on things that might not necessarily jive with the brand, but you need to at least understand if you're starting to see brand drift, because it's very easy to do. As, again, Kathleen said in the keynote, it's very easy to start working in the business and not be working on the business, and sometimes you're making so many survival decisions that you forget about making the strategic ones that are actually going to keep you alive in the long term. Having somebody at the very least can say, hey, we are building an impression in people's minds, and we have built this level of trust and equity in their minds. We need to be faithful to that, show some fidelity, and make sure that we are making decisions that aren't just knee-jerk because we saw seltzer come out, and boy, don't we want to make one of those. That's important. Having a chief brand officer just means you have somebody who is able to be in that accountable spot on the RACI matrix for everything involving the brand. It's also important, as we talked earlier, don't overextend the brand. If you've built an identity in your mind, the further and further you drift away from that, the more and more you risk losing customers. So in the Charlotte area where I live, our oldest and largest brewery is Old Mecklenburg Brewing Company. Old Mecklenburg is, was for years, a 100% Reinheitsgebot German-style brewery with an amazing beer garden, just named #1 by USA Today. Been doing it to, they built up to 25,000 barrels entirely in self-distribution, all off the back of that identity. They started rolling out hazy IPAs and Belgian wit beers and a whole variety of non-German style beers just about 6 months ago, and they've dropped about like 3,000 barrels a year, even as they've opened the second beer garden. They wound up sacrificing the brand equity, not harvesting it, and that's where you can run into danger. You know, once you build an identity, it's okay to pivot that identity, but make it intentional. Don't just chase things because you see the shiny new thing or because you really got to make rent this month. Well, make rent this month. Keep your doors open, but make sure that you're making these decisions purposefully and in response to the realities on the ground, not just at a whim. And then the biggest one, make sure that you really have your differentiators in mind. As we have more and more breweries in this industry, bless you. We make beer was a differentiator for a long time. But the bar down the street, you know, they probably not only have just as much craft beer on as you do, but probably from multiple makers around the area, maybe nationally and beyond. Making beer is not a differentiator. For the average customer, it's been shown time and time again, they don't even really care where it's made. They do care that there's a hand behind it, that there's people behind it. They don't care that it's made necessarily on site. So you need to understand what makes your products different. You need to understand what makes your space different. And you need to have those really worked out because that is your value proposition. We're not a special category anymore. We're a product, a regular, normal product. That's okay. That was always going to happen. You know, Blink 182 took a lot of heat when they took punk music and made it, you know, mainstream. But at the end of the day, that was what was always going to need to happen for punk music to continue to grow. Same things happen in craft beer. We're talking to a less sophisticated audience, and that's all right. We were always going to reach that point, but it means more than ever we have to understand what makes us different because we're not all just reaching for the same tiny handful of beer geeks because all of them open breweries and most of them are in this room. And then last but not least, building a brand takes time. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint. You know, one of the things I got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old at home, one of the things that really envy about those girls is the fact that they can literally walk in a room, see another kid and their best friends, like they've known each other their entire lives, because I guess fractionally they have at that point. But for adults, for the average person, that's not how it works. You make friends over time. It's something that has to build and be established through repeated interactions, through building that trust, building that consistency, building that rapport. Same goes with businesses. So don't get discouraged if something doesn't feel like it's having an impact like that. You know, just like with people, it takes time. So set that strategy, stick with that strategy, find ways of measuring that strategy, but you need to stick with it, give it the chance to develop, and then reevaluate if it's something you need to move away from. Just gonna take a drink for a second. So, some recommended ingredient for everybody. if you're looking to do some follow-up, and I'm always happy to talk to anybody, I'll have my contact information up on the last slide, but if you're looking to do some independent study, these are some books I highly recommend. Marty Neumeyer is basically the guy when it comes to marketing and branding in the modern era. Absolutely, for any of those 3 books, anything he's written is absolutely fantastic. If I had to pick one, I'd say probably The Brand Gap would be the one most relevant to this conversation. They're all very quick, easy reads. Even if you're not a marketing professional, I highly recommend them. You'll take something away from it. Branding in 5 Steps, great. 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing for like 2 decades was basically the handbook, the primer if you wanted to be in the marketing field. Some of its stuff, especially related to brand architecture, is pretty outdated, but most of the laws that are within it are still very relevant. At the very least, you can extrapolate some of the core concepts. Crappier Branding Guide, that's from Kodo Design out of Indianapolis. They do fantastic work. Isaac and Cody are friends. They do amazing stuff, and they're probably the #1 thought leaders in our industry, specifically for the marketing and branding side of things, or at least the branding side of things. Sorry, Julie, you'll always be #1 in my heart. Building Story Brand, also fantastic. The last but not least is one that's not on most people's lists. I recommend it to everybody who's willing to listen. Is That Shit Will Never Sell. This is by David Gluckman. He was the product innovation head for Diageo since the 60s. He is the guy behind Kerrygold Butter and Tanqueray 10 and Bailey's Irish Cream and about 100 other products that you've heard of. He is a crazy old South African who worked for an Irish company while in England. He's batshit insane, but he's an entertaining writer. He's absolutely brilliant. He's like 92 years old, and the reason that he named his book That Shit Will Never Sell is because that's what they told him when he first demoed the concept for Bailey's Irish Cream. And it's also what they told him when he said he wanted to publish a book. So he self-published. Go look it up. It's been required reading for everybody who I've had on a sales team basically since it released. But whether you're on the branding or the sales side, fantastic book. And that's all I got for you today, guys. I'll open it for questions if anybody has any. I love it when I nail it so well. There's absolutely no questions. There's always one.
Are the slides available somehow? Because I couldn't read around this alone.
Yeah, no. So the slides will be available through the Guild, but if they don't get it to you, just stop by my booth. I can take down your info. I'm right up there on the expo floor at the Arrive booth, and I'd be happy to send them your way regardless.
Can you talk again a little bit about that shift for Sierra Nevada? The aging, is it just like the decision they get that it's because of 20 years plus of harvesting that brand, or is it like they have invested? Is there any like quantifiable metrics that went into that decision?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I mean, this is an industry that runs on exactly one thing, and it's revenue. That's well, actually even more than that, margin. So that's the truest metric on whether or not it worked. But the decision to be made was being able to really take account of how much recognizability that brand had been able to build over 40 years of its life. So the real question on whether or not it was something that's going to work is, you know, they've been basically shifting dollars away from it and into the Little Things series for now about 6 years. Have you forgotten what Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is? There you go. Really, it's a hard thing to directly quantify, but you know, it's like the classic definition of obscenity. You know, you'll know it when you see it. That's really kind of what you got to keep in mind. So when you have something that you've been building, and you know it's immediately recognizable, and it's your flagship, and it's the reason everybody comes into your tap room. It's not that you're getting rid of it. That's not what's at play here. What you're doing is saying maybe we don't need to be pushing it that hard because everybody already knows what it is. It'll be able to live for a while, and X number of dollars that we're spending, or X number of social media posts on a much smaller scale, X number of feature tastings at our local Total Wine or Bevana, those are going to be that much more impactful for this thing that doesn't have that level of recognizability. And you don't want to do that for everything. You don't want to just leave your top winners dangling. At the end of the day, those are the ones that got you to the dance. They're probably the ones that are going to keep you at the dance. But there are times when you recognize that your brand has to evolve, and that means trusting that the things that got you to the dance are going to be okay for a while. And you need to be able to invest in this new line. That's been huge for them. They've even had talks about whether or not they should ditch the scroll logo, and they kept it in place. I know Brian Grossman. He lives in North Carolina, not too far from me. So the real key is to make sure that you're not throwing the baby out with the brand water, so to speak, but that you are taking the time to invest in your future, because stagnation is death in an industry that moves this quickly. You know, we move in dog years. It's like the running joke in the beer industry. I mean, we have somebody who's been doing this for 20 years, and we're like, oh my God, were you even born yet? Like, like most of the old brands in our industry couldn't even drink if they were people. So it's really important to keep in mind that you have to be constantly innovating and constantly investing. And that doesn't necessarily mean a product. It just means you have to keep that dialogue going and that communication going.
Everything you just said makes so much sense, but at the same time.
That's wonderful. It sounds like nonsense to me. So.
I'm wondering if you can think a little bit more about sort of specifically to that market, you know, for the people who aren't looking to grow the big average water, but have only been around for 5 years, have only been around for 6 years. So they're looking to establish like consistency without doing a complete do-over. How long is how do you try to reestablish a brand or reinnovate a brand that is actually an infant compared to something else that's been around forever? The Sierra Nevada example is great, it's been around for 40 years, but if you're trying to scale 40 years down to a place that's been around for 5 years, like what is the difference? How do you make that change on a smaller time scale, I guess?
No, 100%. So it's a hard question to answer without knowing the specifics, but I'll give it my best shot. So what you want to know how to piss off a brewer? Talk about hazy IPAs, they fucking hate them. And I only say that because hazy IPAs, I mean, I was up in New England. I got my start up in Rhode Island originally, and, you know, Heady Topper, you know, which was really the one that kind of cracked things open. We're talking, what, that was like 2012, really, was when that first started really getting play outside of just the greater Stowe area. So we're talking about a style that's 12 years old, only really took off maybe in the last 8, and yet at the end of the day, it's this thing that feels like it's been around for absolute ever and absolutely ruining all the good old days when all we drank was amber lagers back in the 90s. Things really do move at a highly accelerated rate in this industry. The average brewery doesn't make it past year 3. Usually whenever your first round of loans comes up. So 5 years is not too soon to start revisiting how to stay relevant, because there's not always going to be a new product, but there's always going to be an absolutely new landscape. One of the things that we have to do is keep moving forward. Right now, moving forward in a lot of ways looks like moving back. It means doubling down on tap rooms, which is the largest margin generator for 97% of the breweries in this country, the largest revenue generator for 84% of the breweries in this country. We have to keep our focus on what's actually making the money and the customers that we're serving. So in some ways, that amber ale starts making a whole lot more sense if you're not in distribution, because one amber ale will still serve every old head amber ale drinker like myself that's out there, whereas 5 IPAs might be what it takes just to keep someone even remotely interested in your IPA selection. So there's no one answer, but what I will say is 5 years is not too soon to stay relevant. It's probably too soon to do like a full brand refresh unless there is something really wrong with your brand. Usually somewhere between 5 and 7 years is what they say, but for a lot of us, we haven't even really reached salience in the average customer's mind until we're hitting that like 4 or 5 year mark anyways. So for the customer, it would feel like you're doing a brand refresh after like 2, even if you've been around for 4. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.